Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students, and welcome to Stylistics. Today we will study formalist and functionalist, how they contributed towards the stylistics. I am your instructor Mubashir Hussain, Department of English, Cust. Discussion agenda include: first we will see what was the stance of formalist, and then what was the stance of functionalist, and the turn that came in stylistics due to the functionalists. Who are formalists? Formalists interested in poetic form of literary language. They were inspired by the early ideas of Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure. The formalists were particularly interested in formal linguistic differences between poetic and non-poetic language. This area is often known as literariness debate, such as foregrounding. Jacobson argued that the literary text and other verbal art often focus on the message of text, the poetic function of the text. Jacobson defined poetic function of language with the following. According to him, poetic language is all about the selection and combination of words and sentences. Functionalist stylistics concerned with the relationship between form of language as a system and the context or situation of its production. Traditionally, functional stylistic has often been regarded as distinct from formalist linguistics, and functionalist stylistic is concerned with the semantic function of the formal properties of language system, that is prepositional meaning. And on the other hand, functionalist approaches are fundamentally concerned with the ways in which the formal properties of language are used pragmatically. For functionalists, the context of a language event is as important as the formal feature of what it is comprised. Halliday developed the idea that language has three primary roles or functions which intersect to make meaning. One is ideational function. It is to express ideas and experiences. Clauses as representation of cohesion and coherence. And second, functional is interpersonal. It is to mediate in the establishment of social relationship. Clauses exchange. And the third is textual function of the language, to provide the formal property of language. It takes clause as a message. Functionalist stylistics offer a way of reading between and beyond the text formal properties. According to formalism, syntax is autonomous. It is a module that interfaces with other components, and syntax is independent of context. Formal says this, and what do the functionalists say? They say that grammar is semantically and practically grounded. It should be studied with context taken into account. Syntax exists not for communication per se. It is related to the ability to compute and to compose according to formalism. And what do functionalism say about that perspective? They say that grammar and language are used to convey meaning and to communicate. Okay, in the past, the focus was on the style of oral expression, which was imbued in rhetoric following Aristotle's rhetoric. Since the very inception, the focus was not on written expression, on analyzing the style of writing, but it was on the style of oral expression that was created and inculcated in rhetoric following Aristotle's rhetoric. Rhetoric is the art of speech in simple word. You know that some people may make very impressive speech, use lot of devices that are convincing for the students or for the listener, for the audience. So that is political rhetoric and religious rhetoric. I mean, there are different types of speeches in which the speakers, in order to convince the people and win their hearts and achieve his goals, uses different rhetoric devices. In the history, the focus was on oral expression, the style of analyzing the oral expression, which was created in the rhetoric following Aristotle's rhetoric. However, the flourishing of stylistics was seen in United States and United Kingdom in 1960s under the influence of Russian formalists like Roman Jakobson and Victor Shklovsky. Now, important year in the history of stylistics is 1960s, where there was a bloom of stylistics in 1960s in United Kingdom and in United States under the influence of Russian stylisticians, Russian linguists and theorists. They are Roman Jakobson and Victor Shklovsky. Now, what was their main concern and how that affected the ongoing work in stylistics? A formalist wanted to make the literary inquiry more scientific by placing it on explicit observation about the formal linguistic features. Now, while defining stylistics, in our previous session we have already discussed how stylistic is more scientific, how it is more objective. We have already discussed how it analyzes data scientifically and methodologically and draw a conclusion. So this part is already clear, and we now need to know about formal linguistic features. Formal is adjective from form. So these Russian formalists were concerned with the form of the text, the form of poetry specifically, and other genres of literature generally. And major concern was poetry, in fact, but you can extend the same to the other forms of literature as well. So their focus was on inquiring the form and other aspect of the literature, and especially poetry. They wanted to see what makes poetry more literally than the normal conversation, day-to-day life conversation. What defamiliarizes poetry, what makes it different from the normal conversation, or what is the element of literariness, or what brings literariness in poetry. This was their major concern. So their focus was primarily on, for instance, on analyzing phonological patterns of the poem, grammatical patterns of the graphological patterns, the syntactic patterns, and semantic things, and lexical patterns and semantic patterns of language. We have already discussed in this already before that the languages organize all these levels. Even if you utter a simple sentence, a simple line of poetry, you can analyze for its phonology, you can analyze for its the way it has been written, that is its graphology, you can analyze it for a word choice, so the lexical choices, and you can analyze for the grammatical patterns, so syntactic choices, and you can analyze it for the meaning that is created, and that is semantic choices. So the point is that it is on all these languages, on all these patterns that language organize, it is on these levels that stylisticians has to investigate a specific text. So the primary focus of these formalists was the language patterns, the form of the language. So they wanted to, for instance, to inquire the verb patterns, the noun patterns, the adjective patterns, and juxtaposition, literary devices, putting things next to each other, parallel to each other. So, for instance, they would analyze a juxtaposition, similes, metaphors, euphemisms. We'll study this thing in the classes to come. We have to remember only one thing. In the beginning in 1916s, the work in stylistics in the United States and United Kingdom was influenced by the formalists of Russia, Viktor Shklovsky and Ramon Jakobson. Their primary focus was on form and not on meaning, not on the function that these language patterns perform, not on the meaning that were created. Now, this thing, this weakness, this shortcomings brings another turn in history of stylistics. Functional and contextual side, what I was telling you about, their focus was on form and they ignored the function and the context in which language occurred, in which language patterns were used. Now we know that language is not merely contained in books and dictionaries. It is used practically in society to create meaning, to generate meaning. So language has certain functions to perform that were ignored by the formalists, because formalists were primarily concerned with the form of language as it is used, especially in poetry, but they were not focusing on the functions that the language was performing. And of course, there is always a context in which language is used and which influences the meaning-making process. I have already mentioned that if you have words and dictionary, if you have grammar in grammar books, you cannot communicate, because language is not something to be found in books only. It is something that is used in society by people to make interpersonal meaning, to make meaning between the people. And there are certain functions that are to be performed. For instance, to accept people's invitation through language, you decline their invitation, you receive invitation, you send invitation. Lot we have to do with using the language. So now there was time for stylistics to take functional turn, and as I have mentioned, context is always important in meaning making. Without context, the meaning cannot be understood clearly, created or understood clearly. Though formalists were generally praised for their scientific inquiry of the formal aspect of text, they were also criticized for ignoring functional and contextual side. Now, matter related to function and context were increasing, and these were being addressed in late 1970s. I told you in 60s there was a great blooming under the influence of the formalist, but in 1970s there was a functional turn in stylistics. A especially influential model was Halliday's functional model of language, which is a model of linguistic meaning making as a social phenomena influencing and influenced by the context in which it occurs. Now, I have already explained to you people in previous steps what is meant by model. It is a theory, it is how you conceptualize something. So Halliday came up with his functional model of language, but then Halliday came up with his model, his theory of language, and he focused on the linguistic meaning making as a social phenomena influencing by the context in which it occurs. Language is not only in books, it is used in society. So Halliday explained language as a social phenomena which is influenced and which influences the context in which it occurs. For instance, if I stand in class and say I want a people to come here mean class in that class, and it mean present day date, and after a month I am standing in mosque and I ask them come and listen me. I attend them in mosque and the date after a month will be changed. So what I say in class, what I say in mosque, situation, people, these all things determine the context. So historically we see in 1970s it was emphasized certain contexts do matter, they are important, and Halliday propounded his functional model of language. I repeat that according to his functional model of language, linguistic meaning making is social phenomenon which influences and is influenced by the context in which it occurs. On Halliday, every linguistic choice came to be seen as functional, that is, every language used is for performance of certain function, and the analyst would consequently investigate the function as opposed to focus on form of language as it is actually used in specific context. The functionist approach entailed interest in longer texts such as narrative fictions and play texts. I have already explained that the formalists were primarily concerned with the poetry, analyzing the literariness of poetry, analyzing the form, but the functionalists they develop interest in longer texts such as fiction and play texts. With its focus on social context, Hallidian linguistics came to play a significant role in branches of stylistic which focus on linguistic manifestation of ideologies such as feminist and critical stylistics. In simple words, the Hallidian model of linguistics influences the feminist and critical stylistics also. Because these branches of stylistics, that is feminist and critical stylistics, are concerned with linguistic demonstration of ideology. When we use language in a text, we communicate a lot. We show our assumption, social assumption of power, ideology, and relations. For instance, if I say, bring me a cup of tea, I have used language, give order. So it means the language demonstrates that I assume power over someone. I have assumed that I am boss and the person is my subordinate. So language also demonstrates our social ideologies, our power structure, our power relations, and stylistic, especially feminist critical stylistics, they are concerned with the analysis of linguistics, demonstration of ideology. Now, Hallidian linguistics came to play a significant role in branches of stylistic with focus on linguistic manifestation of ideology such as feminist and critical stylistics. Okay.